Somewhere along your path, maybe in the quiet disintegration of your plans or in the sudden clarity that followed a long confusion, something inside you fell silent. Not out of fear, not even out of sadness, but in a way that felt inevitable. The old fire that once burned so brightly, to achieve, to chase, to prove, slowly flickered out, and you found yourself staring at your own life as though it no longer belonged to you. You didn't quit. You just couldn't keep pretending. And for a moment, there was relief. The mask dropped. The performance ended. You stepped out of the spinning wheel and finally caught your breath. But what came next, no one warned you about. The stillness wasn't golden. It was bewildering. You were no longer who you had been, but you weren't yet someone new. People called it laziness. They told you to push through. But deep down you knew this wasn't about energy, it was about truth. The things you used to care about, recognition, ambition, validation, now felt hollow. They didn't repulse you. They simply stopped moving you. And you asked yourself, why do I feel so empty? So, now that I finally see the truth, this is the hidden chapter of spiritual awakening, the part they don't speak of in the books or podcasts. It's the quiet descent after the revelation, the collapse of false fuel, the mourning of the self you no longer recognize. Carl Jung called this a sacred stage, a threshold, the moment between ego death and the rise of the authentic self. It feels like a fog, like standing at the edge of a cliff where no map exists, only the soft pull of something deeper that hasn't yet spoken its name. You are not broken. You are not lazy. You are dissolving. And this very unraveling, is the beginning of your becoming. Welcome to the silence after the light. There's a peculiar kind of silence that follows the thunder of awakening, not the kind you find in meditation or the peaceful stillness of a mountaintop, but a hollow quiet that feels like standing in a house you once loved, furnished with memories, but stripped of meaning. Everything that once drove you, that once gave your day structure, the pursuit of success, validation, that constant inner push, seems to evaporate. It's like waking up from a dream you didn't know you were dreaming, only to find that the world you've returned to feels unfamiliar, almost foreign. People often expect awakening to arrive with a divine soundtrack and fireworks of clarity. They think you'll suddenly know your purpose and leap into inspired action. But more often than not, what actually arrives is a fog, a soft, disorienting fog that muffles ambition and replaces urgency with stillness. And in that stillness, many feel a strange kind of emptiness, not because they're lost, but because the compass they once followed no longer points anywhere that matters. The inner world has shifted, but the outer world hasn't caught up yet. Imagine someone who used to thrive on productivity, every hour scheduled, every task color-coded. After awakening, they find themselves staring at their calendar, wondering why it all feels absurd. They're not lazy, they're just no longer seduced by motion for motion's sake. This is the sacred pause. The nervous system begins to downshift, the soul begins to whisper. And if they're brave enough to listen, not fill the void, not run from it, they might start hearing something more honest than any motivational quote ever printed. What most don't realize is that this emptiness isn't a problem to be fixed. It's a space to be honored. In a culture obsessed with performance and constant growth, doing nothing feels like failure. But in truth, it's preparation. Think of it like winter, the quiet beneath the soil before spring arrives. It's in this silence that the deeper self begins to stretch awake. The ego may panic. It wants direction, identity, a to-do list. But the soul knows better. It knows the map isn't outside anymore. It's forming slowly, quietly, within. And just as you start to settle into this quiet, just as you begin to accept that the old fire won't relight, something even stranger begins to happen. You start wondering if maybe, just maybe, this isn't apathy at all. Maybe it's the beginning of something else entirely. Here's one of the great misunderstandings about spiritual awakening. People think it should make you more energized, more motivated, more on fire for your dreams. But the truth is, it often feels like someone pulled the plug on your ambition and quietly left the room. And suddenly, you're sitting there staring at your to-do list like it's written in a foreign language. The drive is gone, but not because you don't care. It's because you finally stopped pretending to care about things that were never yours to begin with. Apathy is hollow. It's numbness that comes from disconnection. But what you're experiencing is sacred exhaustion. The soul's way of saying, I'm done running on borrowed energy. It's a kind of inner rebellion against the noise, the pressure, the constant need to prove. You're not checking out, you're checking in. And what's replacing all that fake urgency is a stillness that's so rare it almost feels wrong, especially in a world addicted to hustle culture, where self-worth is measured by output. Let's be real. This is the moment when people around you start to worry. They'll say things like, you used to be so driven, or don't you want to do something with your life? And it stings. Not because they're wrong, but because they're speaking from a place you no longer live. Your spiritual path has shifted. You're not chasing success for the sake of it. You're not hustling for attention anymore. You're craving something deeper: alignment, presence, authenticity. So what do you do when you're no longer inspired by the same things? First, allow it. Let yourself be in the void without needing to explain it. Second, get curious. What pulls you gently instead of pushes you hard? Maybe you used to love journaling just to vent, but now you're drawn to writing poems that you don't even show anyone. That's not apathy, that's realignment. It's subtle but powerful. It's your intuition whispering louder than the ego ever could. And just as you begin to trust that stillness, to believe that maybe you're not lost but finally stepping into something more real, you'll start to sense the shape of what comes next. Not through plans or productivity hacks, but through a deeper kind of awareness, one that Carl Jung knew intimately and named with quiet reverence. Jung called it the liminal space, or the in-between. The sacred threshold where the ego dissolves but the true self hasn't yet stepped forward. And let's be honest, it doesn't come with flashing signs or spiritual certificates. It feels more like standing in a foggy field at dusk, unsure of which direction leads home and realizing you're not even sure what home means anymore. This isn't a mistake. This is the architecture of deep transformation. And yes, it's uncomfortable, because all your usual reference points have vanished. The liminal space strips you of control, and that's exactly what makes it so holy. You can't strategize your way through it. You can't manifest your way out of it. This is the cocoon stage. The part no one glorifies, because from the outside it looks like regression. But on the inside, it's everything. Your identity is dissolving like the caterpillar in the chrysalis, and that goo, that formless in-between, is what births the butterfly. Not effort, not clarity, dissolution. If you've ever woken up and thought, I don't know who I am anymore, you're likely in this space. And that's a good sign, believe it or not. The person you thought you were, the one shaped by childhood patterns, societal scripts, and survival instincts, has outlived their purpose. You're not broken. You're becoming. You just haven't met that next version of yourself yet, because she's not built from pressure. She's unfolding in silence. So how do you navigate the liminal? First, stop trying to figure it out. Seriously, your mind isn't in charge here. Instead, focus on presence. Go for walks without a destination. Write words that don't need to impress. Listen to music that makes you feel more than it makes you think. The point is not productivity, the point is recalibration. Your nervous system is learning how to move without panic, how to be without performance. And somewhere within that quiet, within the weight of the not yet, a shift begins. subtle at first, like a new tone in your inner voice, or a slight pull toward something you can't quite name. You won't see it coming, but you'll feel it. And when you do, you'll know you're crossing into the next chapter, the one where presence finally starts to replace persona. There comes a moment when the mask simply stops fitting. You try to wear it out of habit, out of politeness, even out of fear, but it feels tight, itchy, wrong. That's the persona, the carefully crafted identity you built to survive, to belong, to be admired. For years, maybe decades, it worked. It got you through job interviews, social circles, even relationships. But now, after awakening, it feels like theater, and you can't pretend to enjoy the performance anymore. The persona is not inherently bad. It's part of how we learn to move in the world, but it was never meant to be the whole story. When spiritual awakening strips it away, what's left isn't failure, it's raw presence. The kind of presence that doesn't need a script or applause. It's quieter, yes, but infinitely more real. And in that presence, there's a freedom that ego could never manufacture. The freedom to just be, without needing to prove. You might notice this shift in small, almost invisible ways. Maybe you stop posting on social media for validation and start sharing only when it feels meaningful. Or you leave a conversation because your energy says no, even if your mind still whispers, "Be nice." These aren't acts of rebellion, they're signs of realignment. Your inner compass is tuning itself to truth, and truth doesn't play roles. It doesn't chase, it resonates. One of the hardest parts of this transition is how quiet it is. The persona was loud, familiar, constantly reacting. Presence is spacious, still, often uncertain, and that silence can be intimidating. But it's also where the authentic self begins to speak. Not in grand declarations, but in soft inner nudges. You might feel called to rest more, to say less, to create without an audience. That's not regression. That's refinement. That's the soul stepping forward. And just when you begin to surrender to that stillness, into that quiet power of presence, a deeper phase begins to unfold. One ancient mystics and alchemists knew by another name: the blackening. This is the part of the journey that no one glamorizes, the stage the ancients called nigredo, the blackening, where everything begins to decay so that something new can grow. It's not poetic when you're in it. It's not beautiful, like an Instagram quote. It's dark, it's confusing. It's the space where your ego has been dismantled, your old identity no longer holds, and yet the new self hasn't arrived. You're not flying, you're not crawling. You're just dissolved. In this phase, it's common to feel like your life is unraveling. Your habits no longer stick. Your routines feel meaningless. Even your dreams feel like they belong to someone else, and because they did. You might find yourself unable to do the simplest things you once found effortless. Getting out of bed, returning texts, making plans. It feels like dysfunction, but it isn't. It's the psyche saying, "We're under renovation. Please excuse the mess." And here's where it gets tricky. The world around you doesn't understand nigredo. It calls it laziness, depression, failure. But this is spiritual compost. This is the soil being turned over so the seeds of the true self can begin to root. If you're here, it doesn't mean you've lost your way. It means your soul is refusing to keep living someone else's story. It's a sacred protest. Against noise, against pretending, against anything that isn't real. What do you do in the blackening? Very little, and that's the point. You learn how to sit, how to witness, how to let go without rushing to replace what's gone. You might journal without trying to reach a conclusion, or take long walks without any need for direction. You might cry for no clear reason. Good. Let it all break down. Alchemy begins with destruction. And from that dark, fertile emptiness, something astonishing begins to stir. Not loudly, not all at once, but subtly. A whisper, a hum, a feeling that what's next won't be a performance, it will be a revelation. And with that, the awakening of the true self begins to glimmer just beneath the surface. When the false layers burn away and the silence has been sat with long enough, something begins to emerge, not like a lightning bolt, but like morning light seeping under a closed door. This is the awakening of the true self. It doesn't come with fireworks or grand declarations. It comes with quiet, undeniable alignment. Suddenly, you're no longer asking, "What should I do?" but rather, "What feels true?" And that shift, from should to soul, changes everything. You begin to notice that your energy returns, but in a different form. It's no longer frantic or fueled by approval. It's grounded, intentional. It shows up when you're creating, something honest when you're connecting without masks, when you're simply doing what makes your inner world feel peaceful. And yes, it can be disorienting at first, because this new motivation doesn't roar, it hums. You feel pulled by truth, not pushed by fear. This is where alignment replaces ambition. You might still work hard, still set goals, still show up, but now the fuel has changed. You're no longer driven by the fear of being not enough. Instead, you're moved by the call to live as your whole integrated self. And that changes how you create, how you love, how you lead. It's no longer about proving. It's about expressing. Your life becomes art, not a performance. A practical example? You might find yourself declining opportunities that once thrilled your ego but now feel out of sync. Or you might finally say yes to something small, a personal project, a spiritual practice, a long-held dream, not because it'll get you somewhere, but because it feels like coming home. The ego sees success as arrival. The soul sees it as embodiment. And just when you think you've landed somewhere solid, a deeper question emerges. What does it really mean to live from the soul? Not just touch it, but anchor in it. And here is where the work shifts again, from awakening into awareness to integration. Here's the turning point many miss. Awakening isn't the end. It's the invitation. And what it invites you into is not escape, but embodiment. That's where most spiritual paths quietly detour. It's tempting to hover in the higher states, to call everything an illusion and detach from the messiness of real life. But Jung warned, true transformation doesn't take you out of your humanity. It drops you deeper into it. Integration is where your spirituality stops being a concept and starts being a practice. It's when all the wisdom you've gathered, from shadow work to intuition, from energy alignment to emotional healing, stops living in your journal and starts shaping your conversations, your boundaries, your daily choices. It's not about perfection. It's about congruence. About your insides and your outsides finally speaking the same language. And yes, it's harder than it sounds. It's one thing to have an insight during meditation. It's another to hold that insight when your partner triggers your abandonment, wound, or your boss questions your worth. That's where the real work happens. In the body, in the breath, in the moment you choose to respond instead of react. It's not glamorous, but it's sacred. It's spiritual presence in the ordinary. You may notice that integration doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like remembering, again and again, choosing to come back to center. You'll forget, of course. You'll bypass. You'll avoid. And then, you'll catch yourself, breathe, and begin again. That's the rhythm of embodied healing. Like waves, coming in, going out. No punishment, just practice. And as this rhythm settles into your system, as the sacred becomes sustainable, something begins to surface. Something deeper than healing. A kind of power born not from force but from wholeness. And to step into that, you'll have to walk through the next often misunderstood gate, the one where the shadow meets the light. Now we enter the underworld of transformation, not a metaphorical place but a lived reality. This is where all the parts of you that were left behind, rejected, silenced, or buried start to rise. And they don't come back clean and poetic. They come back messy, loud, complicated. This is shadow work, not as a trendy term but as the sacred and sobering labor of integration. If the true self is the house, the shadow is the foundation. You can't build one without digging into the other. Many people try to skip this part. They want the light without the labor. But Jung knew, the shadow doesn't disappear by being ignored. It gets louder. It sabotages. It speaks through anxiety, projection, emotional reactivity. But when we face it, really sit with it, we begin to understand its language. That inner critic, it was protecting your younger self. That rage, it's your boundaries, begging to be honored. The shadow doesn't want to destroy you. It wants to be seen. You'll know you're doing shadow work when it stops being comfortable, when the spiritual bypassing ends, when the spiritual cliches no longer apply. This is the phase where you finally stop saying love and light and start whispering, I forgive myself. It's when you begin to track your triggers like trailheads, each one pointing to an unhealed story, not a flaw. And if you're brave enough to stay present, to not numb, not run, something powerful happens. You gain access to your full range. Practical example? Next time someone disappoints you, instead of venting or shutting down, try asking, what part of me feels familiar in this pain? Sit with that, write it out. Let the emotions speak before the ego does. This isn't about self-blame, it's about self-reclamation. Shadow work teaches you that every emotion has a root, every wound has wisdom. And as those roots are unearthed, the soil of your soul becomes fertile. Fertile for what exactly? For a new kind of movement. Not one born of effort or insecurity, but something quieter, more consistent. Something many call motivation, but which you're about to experience on a much deeper soul-led level. Motivation, when it's soul-led, doesn't feel like the adrenaline rush you've been taught to chase. It's not a surge, it's a pulse, steady, subtle, and stubbornly honest. It doesn't scream, go, it whispers, now. This is the kind of inner movement that emerges after the shadow has been held. The old self dissolved and the noise turned down low enough to hear your truth. It doesn't ignite because of a deadline. It stirs because your whole being says yes. At first, it's barely noticeable. A soft pull to read that book again, to start writing, to speak the truth even when your voice shakes. It's not driven by the fear of being left behind. It's driven by the desire to no longer abandon yourself. This soul motivation is rooted in authenticity. It's deeply personal and almost always impractical by the world's standards. But it feels right in your bones, and that's how you know it's real. You may find yourself saying no more often, not as rebellion, but as reverence. You'll rest without guilt. You'll create without needing validation. You'll walk away from things that once fed your ego and now feel like noise. The beauty of this stage is that your actions begin to match your essence. Your life becomes less about performance and more about presence. And that shift, subtle as it is, creates ripples you can't always see, but can absolutely feel. One small but powerful practice. Start noticing what energizes you even when no one's watching. Is it sketching, teaching, listening to music while staring at the ceiling? These are your inner breadcrumbs. Follow them. They lead not to productivity, but to alignment. And from that alignment, a new rhythm begins to form. Not rushed, not forced, but alive. That rhythm will begin to shape how you relate to the world, how you work, how you love, how you rest. And eventually, you'll notice that your life doesn't feel like a list anymore. It feels like a conversation, a dialogue with something greater, something unseen, something deeply symbolic. To live symbolically is to let go of the idea that life is a linear equation. Input equals output, goal equals reward. Instead, life becomes a dance with meaning. You begin to notice patterns, synchronicities, intuitive nudges. You start asking different questions. What is this moment showing me? What is life trying to say through this delay, this ache, this desire? It's no longer about controlling the narrative. It's about listening to the language beneath it. Symbolic living means your decisions aren't dictated by logic alone, but by resonance. You'll find yourself trusting gut instincts, reading between the lines, sensing the energy of a room before you speak. That doesn't mean abandoning reason. It means adding depth to it. It means realizing that sometimes the most rational thing you can do is follow the irrational pull of your own soul. That dream, that idea, that place you've been drawn to without explanation. There's a message there, a metaphor, a map. You start seeing life as layered. That car breaking down isn't just bad luck. Maybe it's a forced pause. That heartbreak wasn't just a loss, maybe it was a mirror. You stop rushing to label things as good or bad and start asking, what is this teaching me? This shift doesn't make life easier, but it makes it richer. You begin to live with a sense of depth that can't be explained but can absolutely be felt. A simple practice to cultivate symbolic awareness? Keep a synchronicity journal. Nothing fancy. Just a place to jot down patterns you notice, repeated, numbers, recurring themes in conversations, dreams that leave a lingering feeling. Over time, you'll begin to see the threads. And those threads will begin to weave a new kind of clarity. Not the kind that demands certainty, but the kind that roots you in wonder. And as wonder becomes your compass, the final illusion crumbles. The belief that you ever needed to be more. You don't. You were always enough. You're not here to perfect a persona. You're here to remember your presence, to let your life become art, not to impress, but to express. And now, the journey continues, not because you must chase it, but because it's already unfolding beneath your feet. So now that you see the path for what it truly is, what will you do with it? Will you rush back to the familiar? Or will you stay and listen to what this silence is trying to teach you? Will you continue measuring your worth by outdated systems? Or will you start honoring the deeper rhythm that lives beneath the noise? Because here's the truth. You don't need to be more productive. You need to be more present. You don't need to chase motivation. You need to follow resonance. And once you begin living from that place, and even if imperfectly, life starts to feel less like a performance and more like a prayer. Now I want to hear from you. Have you been in this space? Are you navigating that strange in-between where everything familiar has fallen away? What's been the hardest part for you, and what have you learned about yourself in the process? Leave a comment and share your experience. Let this be a space where we witness each other, not fix each other. And if this resonated with you, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. There's so much more to explore together. This journey doesn't end here. In fact, it's only just beginning.